we get started, there's still messing with the sound. This is writing for video games. Thank you guys for showing up. A lot of people here. That's awesome. It's really amazing. We're going to go down the line, introduce ourselves, then we're going to go through some initial kind of what writing is for and the high level things, and then a lot is going to be Q&A with you guys, asking us questions and prompting us to discussion. So I'll start. My name is Eddy Webb. I was a content designer for EVE Online and the much lamented World Darkness MMO for 5 years. And now I am a freelance writer and game designer. I am a content producer at Interactive Studios, and I work for companies such as Choice Games.
Hi, my name is Charlie Hawkins. I'm probably the biggest novice on the panel. None of my stuff has really been published. I'm more on the journalism side. I was once upon a time on the game development side, but have since gone to, I guess, the dark side, as many people call it. I'm an independent video game user review journalist, and yeah, that's about all I can say.
I'm Bill Bridges. I'm a writer and game designer, formerly with CCP and White Wolf, currently back again with Holistic Design, my own company that does computer games, strategy games mainly, and painting sounds, science fiction universe.
My name is Nathan Knaack. I'm a writer, game designer, level designer. I started my career with Hybrid Studios. I worked on Global Agenda, and then I went to CCP and worked on EVE Online, Dust 514, and World of Darkness. I work with a couple of different companies right now, Binary Spark Studios and Handyman Studios, and I self-published my first book recently. So.
What do you want?
I'm not bad. Hey guys, my name is Matt Woomer. I worked originally on City of Heroes back at Interactive Studios in the early 2000s, and I was not a writer, but I was a programmer working on the mission system, and then worked at IRS with Nathan, and most recently we published an MMO, my company Blue Mammoth Games, that we did a lot of course, mission writing for. And then most recently we are working on a fighting game, Brawlhalla, check it out downstairs. And that's been interesting because we've been doing writing for a fighting game, which has been an interesting project. My experience is mostly with being on the room while we're hiring writers, except for the fighting game where we did a lot of the writing ourselves, and that's been a realization. There we go, that's me.
And actually, this is my first point. But before I go, can everyone hear us okay? Okay, good. One of the constant questions I get when I try to explain to people outside the game industry what writers do is like, oh, so you're a programmer, or oh, so you write just the online dialogue, and there's a lot of confusion on what actual writing for video games entails. Recently, about the past 3-4 years, the International Game Developers Association has kind of settled on the title narrative designer, but it's a pretty encompassing term. There's a lot of different things that go into that. It can cover things like world building, coming up with all of the world and content and the structure of where the game's taking place. It can cover the actual character writing, characterization. It can cover the on-screen text, but it can also cover how you actually get the experience across to the people playing the game. There's a lot of writing that writers for games do that never actually gets seen by the final audience. A lot of documentation, a lot of internal memorandums, a lot of meetings that have communicated to other developers. So if you don't know a lot about it, the first thing you hear is, oh, writing for a fighting game, that's weird because there's not a lot of on-text screen. There's probably going on in the background of that, like, what the tournament structure is like, what each of the characters are and how they move and how they look. Is that pretty accurate?
That's exactly right. It is amazing how long we spent working on what amounted to a very small number of actual words in the game. Yeah, that is exactly right, and went round and round about. There's no question about it. The game is called Brawlhalla, right? So the question is, well, is it set in Valhalla?
Right.
Literally the figuring that out was months. Welcome to video game writing.
Absolutely. So I kind of run the line, but I'm curious one kind of point you've had trying to express to other people outside of another writer what drives you do for your job. Have you noticed this yet?
So, in like when you have regular, just with when you go to conventions, you try to describe what you do. I've also done a homebrew pencil paper RPG. I'm on my 14th iteration now, rebuilding the entire structure and trying to explain how difficult it is to keep consistent while making the adjustments required to make the game more fun is sometimes mind-numbingly crazy. You know, because to some people, you think, oh, you know, it's just a really simple story. So you got 2 hours worth of you know, gameplay. That doesn't take long at all. You know, you could probably snap that out. That's, you know, a couple months worth, and you might have 2 hours, and some of those 2 hours probably pretty good.
Actually, you have, but
Yeah.
you better be with me.
Beyond the fact that your friends and family always say, oh, you program these games, you know computers really well. You know, no, I'm a writer. You know, I don't know the programming part. But a lot of people associate writing with words alone, but obviously writers come up with situations and dramas. They're dealing with thematics. In a video game capacity, you're working with the creative director and the art department to establish a mood that you can maintain throughout the game. It's tied heavily with the thematics. So a lot of high-level meta stuff before you even get to the actual words that might never show up.
So I've never actually had the title narrative designer. Every studio I've worked in has been either a content creator, which involved some amount of writing and some amount of actual physical world building and level design. But before CCP, I'd always been the only writer at the company, which means you get responsible for coming up with what the story is, doing the world building, all the characters, what they say, voice acting, scripts, marketing material, technical documentation. Like you write the commercials, you write everything. And every time the CEO wants to put out a press release, you know, he drags you into his office and has to explain what adjectives are to him. You know, it's you have to, even though you are only a writer, you have to almost be multiple, you have to know multiple disciplines just to be able to cover all those bases.
I am deeply suspicious of the term narrative designer. I don't know what to think about it because, you know, from a hiring standpoint, if a person came into an interview and said, well, I'm not a writer, I'm a narrative designer, I don't know what I would think.
Well, I mean, it's funny, because there's been a recent discussion about the second point, because there's some of the people who've been in the industry for a while, it's like going, what does it do back with narrative designer? The writer works just fine. And I think, for me, it's points of, you're right, if someone says, I'm not a writer, I'm a narrative designer, I think that they're missing the point. Writer is kind of a inside of, part of that narrative experience, because one thing I ran into, certainly a lot of, is being able to take a background or a concept, explain it to an animation person and say, okay, we need this guy to move like this to get this idea across. We need to explain it to concept artists, to explain it to technical artists, to level design. And being able to translate kind of what's in your head or what's in the documentation, because, spoiler alert, no one reads the documentation. You have to be able to express that, and really you're kind of crafting and designing some level of experience, or at least communicating to those who are in those disciplines what that experience needs to be. So I understand there's certainly some people who are kind of like trying to make writers seem like a lesser title, and I disagree with that. I'm with you on that. Writing is a huge component of it, and certainly script writing has managed to keep that cachet, because a lot of script writers do very similar. They have to talk to the director, they have to talk to cinematography, and so on and so forth. They advise during the course of the shoot most times. But I don't think video games have gotten there yet. And so we have this kind of weird kludge of a title trying to get other people who aren't writers to understand, oh, narrative designer, you design things. You're a designer, I get that.
Well, I think a large part of it was the term writer. They're writers from other fields of media who come into games and don't understand interactivity. And so narrative designer was an attempt to try to come up with a label for someone, well, this guy knows interactivity. Well, I spoke with a recruiter once, and at CCP, my title was a content designer. And to this recruiter, that meant, oh, you come up with stats for creatures, but you don't actually write stories because that's a narrative designer. I was like, these are not established terms throughout the industry, but some people in their heads are getting to that.
That's exactly a good point. And one of the best examples I've found, although it is a hyperbolic example of what writers kind of have to go through in studios, is there's this Twine game called The Writer Will Do Something. I highly recommend check it out. It's about 5 minutes to play, and they're laughing because we've all been in these meetings. And basically, if the premise is you're the writer for a franchise, a beloved franchise about to reboot, you're 6 months off schedule, and everyone's called you into the meeting, and everyone's kind of blaming you for problems with the game. That's a bit of exaggeration, but certainly pieces of that, where people don't understand what the writer's actually doing on the project, is pretty common. So that's a good example of why, like Bill says, the industry hasn't quite figured out what this role is, because it touches on so much. I mean, I know in the 6 or 7 years that I've been doing this now, I've done everything from, like I said, biased artists to directing voice actors, and even being involved in the hiring process for voice actors. As well as I did consulting for a medical company because they wanted to have their narrative designed for this, medical simulation. So there's a huge penumbra that it seems like it can encompass everything, and in some ways it does, but that means people outside of it often don't quite get what you do.
Well, part of the thing in the industry too is every single game is reinventing the wheel. Not only in terms of what the writer is doing, but in terms of everything. They're always building their own systems, their own procedures, their own in-house narrative system. Unlike, say, the movie industry, which has all that, logic, logistics, and infrastructure down. When you hire a grip, he knows what he's doing. There's all those defined roles. But from one company to the next, from one game to the next, who knows what goes on.
A buddy of mine who does work in the film industry once said that game design is a lot like indie film production, where there's like 6 or 7 people and they're all doing a little bit of everything. And that's a lot closer, to my experience, to game design, where everyone's kind of chipping in and doing stuff, but sometimes it's not quite sure. Having someone's completely divorced from that group doing a specific thing looks a lot on the outside. So we have the scriptwriter, then the team making the film. It's a bit of a weird thing in the indie scene, but where I said more larger scale film is very defined. It goes from here to here to here to here to here, and everyone's kind of used to that process. We're not quite there, we're not quite mature enough yet as an industry to get there. You guys have any more thoughts? Or?
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to keep going and going. One of the challenges you will definitely find, especially if you're getting into writing as for video games, is a lot of times your boss won't know what your job is exactly. They won't know what they want. They want the problem solved, right? And one of the specific problems that we've had, and I've seen this happen 3 separate occasions that I can think of, where the company that I'm at or that I'm doing the hiring will bring in a writer, and the writer will be remote. The writer will be off-site doing writing because it's contracting or for whatever reason. And I have never seen that work. And the reason, and I know again, yes, I want to hear the success story.
Sure,
I want to make it succeed. Is that in an indie studio, everyone thinks on some level that they are the writer. And your job as a writer is not only to write, but also to make sure that everyone feels like they've come into the system. Their input has been heard. And when it's an off-site writer, what winds up happening is, you as the writer are out there, you get all these words, you get it all done, and you give it to them, and you feel like, I've done this great job of giving them what they asked for. They asked for this, I gave them this. And from the studio's point of view, you just came down from on high and dumped on their idea.
Yep.
And I've seen it happen over and over and over again, and just how much the writer's role is to, even though it's nowhere in the job description and it's a total surprise to them, deal with that problem.
Right. The flip side, the success side I found is that you're right, when it's one remote person working with an established in-house team, you're right, that never works well. Because the in-house team, when you're all there, there's a natural ebb and flow of conversation that happens throughout the day that the writer's not a part of. And so what the writer often see is the idea has evolved in the past month or so since last draft, and they don't realize that, and so they're working on old data, and it's like, well, what about my idea I had 3 weeks ago? To them, they've actually, that idea is mature, but the writer's completely new. However, one of the companies that work for Reactive is completely remote. Everybody is remote. And that works actually really well because it forces everyone to talk. We have to talk usually at least once a day. We have a great piece of software called Slack, which is kind of a cross of IM, file share, and video conferencing. And so everyone, it has that data, just toss it in Slack, and then other people can check it at their leisure or on their phone. And then once in a while we get together and say, hey, this conversation's going on a bit of a way, let's actually get together and talk it through. But because we're all remote, we realize that the only way to communicate is through online, and so we're forced to, but people naturally, if they're going to be in a room together, that's going to be their default way of communicating, and they're not going to think to talk to them.
Yeah.
So you have to survey.
My experience is you can get away with it if you have a strong lead writer who's running the show from within the studio. And there were a lot of projects in the 90s that used to do that. I worked on two actually. One of them was Starfleet Academy, but most of that, admittedly, we were writing cutscenes and scripted material for the actors to be in. And it's easy to write that stuff because it's not impinging on gameplay as much. You get some directives, but then you go ahead and write that on your own. And as the writer's job has more and more come into evolving, building the world behind it, it is a little harder, I think.
Right, yeah, you can farm out very discrete chunks, it does work, but then also they're not as impactful and their contributions aren't going to be as fundamental.
What compounds the problem is that optimally a writer would be involved in every stage of the project, from concept to launch.
Sure.
And that never ever.
No, I was to say, have you ever heard that happen?
And if it doesn't happen, optimally, as the writer, you'd like to be involved in the early stages of the project. You can help form what the game's going to be and help you establish all the requirements, this many characters, this many environments, and all that. It doesn't work out that way, though. And there have been times in my career where I've been brought in or made the writer on a project when it's almost done.
Mm-hmm.
And you're sort of handed all of these scenes and all these characters and everything, and somebody just tells you, all right, write the story for this. So you have to take all these existing pieces and make them go together in a way that doesn't look like just a pile of random pieces. So it looks like a narrative. So it's challenging.
Yeah, some companies just bring the writer and write the quests. So all the basic stuff has been designed, at which point you really are just kind of a pen monkey.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Certainly, I've been able to feed myself onto pen monkey tasks, but it is a very different skill set.
It's an honorable profession.
That's not
There's no Wendigism.
So let's go ahead and open the floor to questions. If you guys have any things you want to ask us, yes, sir.
I'm actually writing an idea, like, some of them involve like morale choices and still some of the characters, how they design, how they act. Like, how would I do that exactly? Like, how would I just design like characters that way over the course of the game, and how you act to be the morale choices? How would they kind of act towards the character? You know what I mean?
Are you talking like basically light type exercise choices and how that involves the character?
Well, not just that, but also just choices in general. Like one of the scenes of having like the character like decide if he wants to use this item or this item, and that would affect like later parts of the game.
So the dirty secret of that kind of stuff, I've looked at games like Telltale games, for example, run for really in-depth. And if you play through, you're like, oh my god, my choices had so much impact. You play through again, you realize it's kind of the same story. And that's intentional because there's this idea called scope that you have to worry about is if you make a whole bunch of content or words or whatever that you make for your video game, at a certain point in time you're paying for that, especially expensive stuff like animation art and whatnot. And so if you have characters make choices where they don't see a lot of other content, you're spending a lot of money that most people aren't going to see. So you kind of end up with this basically kind of almost like a waveform where you have like a beginning of the game, a lot of choices, they spread out and they kind of ease back in, and then you have more choices, they spread out and they ease back in. So you're really kind of going at one spine, but the choices, the details along the edge do get modified as you go through.
Well, I'm wanting it to where the game is very playable and you go in different ways each time. Like each ending would probably be distinct, like how the ending would act. You know what I mean?
Right. In terms of how would you do that mechanically, or?
How would I do that? Like, how would I write that in a way so that way it kind of works?
That's the hardest possible way to do it.
Right.
That's right out there. I mean, that's the dream, right? Is to have that game with the nearly infinitely branching tree where every decision leads to two or more completely separate consequences, and you tie them all together. That is really hard. Not only is that really hard to do, just as a writer, like you could just grab twine by yourself and try to write all that out, and you quickly find that you don't have enough hours in the day to cover that. Furthermore, when you bring that to a team of other people who have to program it and make all the art and schedule everything and do all the animations, they're going to look at it and say, you need how many characters for this and how many different animations and how many...
Or you just like, hey, you want to program 2,500 things?
Yeah. Not that many, but it was
But with each choice, it doubles.
Well, I'm talking about like 4 distinct endings, and depending on how you work your way through it, you will only get those 4 endings, depending on like specifics. And if it's like kind of a tie between 2 endings, it would be more of a random split.
Usually variables, basically, it's like you choose A or B. Choice of game, which does this really well. They're using interactive novels, and a lot of times, if you choose A, you get plus 10% to one thing or minus 10% to another thing, and at the end, the ending spit up and it goes, okay, if your meter is at this point, you get this ending, at this point, you get that ending. It's like relationships, a perfect example of this. Every time you do something that the person likes, your relationship goes up, and then you get the good relationship ending. The actual individual choices are secondary to getting that meter to a certain threshold. That's usually the way I've seen it.
But again, one of the things for writing that you can add beyond just the design is to try to make those choices, the thematics on those choices very obvious, even if the details are so different, so that okay, if I choose this, I'm becoming more a violent character versus a more passive character, something like that. Trying to work in visuals to do that, little shorthand. Star Wars has the easiest. If you choose the red lightsaber, you know what side you're going on.
Another thing is like I have two characters who have like there's a romance side quest for them. If you complete the side quest, they unlock both their kind of role abilities at the end, and like I would have the ending vary on one of the endings varying on that side quest here.
Another component is if you have the endings themselves broken into small chunks. So it's supposed to having 4 different endings. You have there's actually 4 stages to the ending. The first stage is these variables were still like the generic ending. The second half is I was positive versus negative or out. And the third one is I unlocked these individual characters, and it plays through as one seamless narrative, but they're actually broken up in very distinct chunks that are then checked.
Fallout style where the ending is like a slideshow, so you
Right.
at each character location or whatever it is.
That sounds very good.
Who has experience writing romance?
I have a little bit of experience with them.
Okay.
I just
In tabletop,
Not for
not really.
I did just join the recently created IGDA Romance 6, so.
What is the best way, without starting to get into the whole fan handling, to write a realistic person or character?
Well, I mean,
Romance.
to be fair, I mean, I don't think. Step back. I'm about to say, it's not fundamentally different from writing a realistic character, but it's not entirely true. The first step should be making interesting characters, because if the second most characters become binary insert kindness to get sex boxes, then it's pointless. Recent social commentary aside on that point. If characters feel like nothing different than I push this button and I get this result, then the romance is going to work. The biggest trouble with writing romance is that it's so hard to get a player to care about that character. Because as much as the characters might care about each other, and that's great, if the players can care, then the romance will short. This is one of the reasons why I think Dragon Age does this really, really well. Most of the iterations of Dragon Age does well because they just make really interesting characters. And then you kind of just throw them together, and there's all these different variables to check whether they're interested in each other or not. But reality is that these are all interesting characters, and whether I'm in a relationship with them or not, I'm still interested in them. And then the relationship becomes an additional component that's interesting and compelling on top of that. But that's not a game that's primarily geared for romance. That's one of the reasons why I don't think we have a lot of primarily romantically geared games, with the exception of some dating sims. Some dating sims pop up a lot of them don't. Usually it's additional a layer, things like a lot of JRPGs do this, specifically the Persona series I'm thinking of right now. But again, that's an additional layer on top of the dungeon crawl. Because it's such an ephemeral, hard to dig into experience, have that personal connection as a player to the character. There's so many other ways that we have trouble as designers still getting players to care about characters in other ways besides romance. And romance is another tricky one on top of that. So I think the big answer is it's something we're still kind of talking about. Like I said, there's enough concern about it that the IGDA has already started talking about. We need to have a special interest group that talks about romance because it's something we all think we can do better. But the fundamental state of it, I've never seen all the romance subplots in games I've seen where ultimately come from. They're interesting, compelling characters first, and the romance is not the primary reason why that character is there.
Definitely do the characters first.
My favorite romance from all of film or television is X-Files, believe it or not. You know, and they just totally, like, they never even concentrated on it until it was like the very last season. They were like, you guys are all really young. You guys all know X-Files.
They're aliens.
Back next year.
Whatever, yeah, it'll be back, and ask your parents. But they have this male and female lead, and for like 7 seasons or something, like there was no romance plot written.
Right.
Like, they just sort of, and that's what built up the tension between them. So when it finally boiled over, you were like,
A somewhat more modern example is Arrow, where there are certain two characters that are supposed to be romantic leads, but then Felicity came along and realized that there was much more chemistry there, and so the writing started to adapt to that existing chemistry and fan interest because those two characters were actually interested to the fans. So that's another good example.
Yeah, that's a super, just real quick, I'd like to, because romance is extremely hard to do in video games, and I think the main reason that it's so hard to do is because the writing of the video games has to reflect or resonate with the action of the video game.
Right.
And it's so hard for the action of a video game to be a moonlit dinner. And so the way, as to get back to what Nathan was saying, it seems like perhaps the best way that I would go about doing a romance in a video game is to have a male and a female or 2 characters that were attracted to each other and then ignore it for the whole video game. And just have them be together
Right.
and do the action of the video game and see what happens.
it's like how you get attracted to women. Like,
Yeah.
Okay. So you said a lot of writing in games does not actually appear on screen. So you said you were doing a fighting game and you've been writing a lot about like characters and stuff, even though like a lot of that might not appear on screen. And I'm assuming that this same thing might apply if you like made a beat 'em up or a shooter or a platformer or something. My question is, the writer, how much do you work with, say, like an artist or a character designer when it comes to making, like in a fighting game, for example? How much, I'm just making an example. If somebody had already made Ryu, would you write Ryu's backstory, or would you work with the artist to help make Ryu?
Well, Bill has had a lot of experience. He was working on the MMO of huge amounts of backstory building up for both you guys. But from my point of view, especially if you have an indie game, if you get Ryu, you have to write Ryu's story because the artist isn't going to want to redraw it. But
One example, actually, Ryu, in Street Fighter, Capcom had only some very rough ideas when they were building those guys. They didn't know a lot about them. They had maybe a few paragraphs and a sheet and stuff. And I know this because when White Wolf did the tabletop version of the Street Fighter role-playing game, we inherited the Bible of it, and there wasn't much there. And so we had to build a whole giant world on just, what these guys roughly were and the organizations that were into that behind them and stuff. So even then, there's not a lot on that kind of game that's necessary. And even then, some of the background is really weird. Like Blanca's origin story in Street Fighter. It's raised by electric eels. Yes. His parents apparently plane crashed in the jungle, and he was raised by electric eels.
They're well known for their nurturing nature.
Okay. Well, I guess more of just what I was asking is how much is the content created for you, and you have to just work with that and make something interesting that on your own, or how often you get to work with like an artist or the team in general and help shape that stuff from the beginning.
Well, the idea was Nathan said is as early as possible you brought in on a lot of the brainstorming, and hopefully you're working with the creative director a lot, and then interfacing through him with the artists so that you can build all this stuff together. It's a big iterative process to get to where you want to be. Too often you're brought in again and again, they've already got this guy, they kind of know, oh, he's a cool fighter and stuff, and he's got this name, but I don't know much beyond that. Fill it in.
Gentle eels in something.
You have to be accommodating as well. It's not, no matter when you're brought in, even if you're brought in at the very beginning, it's literally just you and the creative director deciding what this huge game is going to be. Like if you were the writer from Mass Effect and you were brought in day one, write this game and then we'll have this team of hundreds of people make it. You still have a box you have to work inside. You can't just say, oh, it's going to be this sprawling space epic with hundreds of intricately detailed plans, because somebody's going to come along and go, nope, you have have 7. Maybe if we do a sequel, you'll have 13, and that's it. And but you have to anticipate that sort of thing. Otherwise, you're just going to be heartbroken. You know, you're going to come into this big, impressive script, and somebody's going to say, we can use 3 pages. And
Right,
put a girl man in there.
and related to that, as I mentioned earlier, I jokingly said that they don't read, but part of it is because they're focused on other parts of their job. It's a lot of times they don't have time. They've got deliverables they have to make, so they don't have time to read your 500-page backstory about why this world's amazing. So there is a lot of reduction that happens. It's a lot like okay, they have all these ingredients, they kind of boil them down into one specific thing that they can then get their teeth around, as it were. I know when we were working at CCP, a lot of times we would take these hundreds of books of backstory and had brought down to PowerPoint, a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation, which is very painful, but that's the necessary have to do. And then say, okay, here's all this more information if you need it. Ask me specific questions, and I'll help you out. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, what do you need from me? I will get that for you. So we work with artists, that sometimes it can be very kind of, let's sit down and just talk things out and be awesome again. Sometimes the artist goes, I need 25 signs by tomorrow. I need 25 signs by tomorrow. Get it. So it really depends on which way the nature of the project's flowing, the nature of the studio in general. But I personally found it's usually more often collaborative than not. So right back there, start.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between, like, say, the script for a massive AAA title like GTA 5, and then to an indie game title like Limbo or something. What exactly is the difference between writing a game like GTA 5 to something like Limbo? Like, to be honest, there's not much written stuff for a game like Limbo because it's so small, it's so minutely detailed that it almost requires like no writing in general other than like detailed environment.
I would argue that it's different to say what's between writing War and Peace and writing a poem.
Right.
There's less words in the poem, but I bet you probably as much time into some of those poems. Again, the kind of reduction is like, there have been lots of discussions about, or writing about, okay, here's what the environment's supposed to look like, and here's the areas you're moving through, and here's the story behind those areas, and logs may not show up on screen, but that informs the level designer, that informs the artist, that informs the voice actors, whatever. So, number of words is necessarily indication of amount of effort.
Also, the size of the team is probably your degree of collaboration. I've not played Limbo, but being an indie game, I probably had one writer, maybe 2 writers.
Or the programmer was the writer.
Or the programmer was a writer, or the writer was, somebody's boyfriend or girlfriend who just happened to be there one day and had a great idea for a story. And I'm sure it worked out well, whereas if you're working on something like GTA or Dragon, you might be on a team of dozens, if not more writers. Maybe everybody gets their own little chunk, and everybody takes the script through different phases. So I've worked in both environments now. When I was on EVE Online, I was on a team of at one point 7 or 8 writers we had, some of which were in Iceland. So there was a lot of back and forth. I would write one just short story, one chronicle for the website, and it would have to get peer reviewed by all the 4 people in the Atlanta office, and my boss would have to approve it. And it would go to Iceland, where it would go through their group of people, and they would have to approve it. And I realized at one point that for every short story I wrote for EVE Online, it had to get approved by 8 separate people. So I got to use the "I have 8 bosses" line from Office Space. Everybody thought I was joking about, but it's like, oh, really? So, which is kind of good if you are a writer, which I assume a lot of people here are or want to be. It's good to have that safety net because it means every typo is going to get caught, right? There's no way it's going to go through 8 people without everybody catching when you use a colon instead of a semicolon. But there's that red tape, there's that process that you have to be comfortable with. Whereas when you're on a small team, like what I'm on now, I write a story and I show it to the guys and they'll say, I'm a programmer, I'm an animator, whatever, put it on the website. That's terrifying. But to put something out, I could have spelled something wrong. That's my career on the line. So hopefully you can find a sweet spot somewhere in there.
And the thing is, everybody on the game is doing writing to a degree. Level designers are doing a lot of writing, which is not word. They're building environments, the setting, everything is telling a story to the player. And hope there's a degree to which if there is a writer on the project, hopefully he's empowered to act as an editor at that point to help those guys make sure that what they're doing fits into the thematics and the mood that's already been established so that these ideas aren't clashing and they're all together telling the same underlying story.
Right, because the title of writer for a video game seems honestly really obscure in the whole process of things, because what exactly are you writing is the best part exactly, because are you writing a story, are you writing level design? It's not exactly clear just
Yeah,
what
well, I
kind.
mean, if you look at the whole game as telling a story to the player to a degree is in charge of what parts of that story he uncovers at what time, but that the world itself is telling that story, and hopefully the writer is empowered on the project to make sure that everybody is telling roughly the same story with that game instead of 5 different stories that actually completely clash.
Which is why I go back and I'm a little defensive of the narrative designer title, because having one person say, this is the narrative our game is making, I'm telling you this direction it needs to go in, does give a little more clarity. It's like, I'm not just a writer, I'm a person that says, this level should change this direction because it fits into the narrative in this exact way. And whereas a writer, you're right, it's a little more obscure. It's like, where's your authority and power begin then? The designer's more clear. You design narrative. Okay, well then, we have a narrative question, we go to the narrative designer.
It is true that the narrative designer title has the advantage of if you are hired, if you are in a big indie team, reasonably sized indie team where you are hired as a writer, you will be inventing your job. Your boss does not necessarily know what your job is. And so having the narrative designer title might give you more flexibility to say, no, I'm this, you know.
To be good at that, you have to be assertive about it, otherwise somebody will teach you to program and then you start doing that all the time.
I know Python now, it's great. Good, over here.
How does how does an idea, I guess, turn into like a game story? Like, if you have an idea for a world, maybe like a few characters within the world you're building, like where do you go from there? I'm assuming it would be generally more than just you and your friend being like, hey, I have a really cool idea for a game, because it's a really small indie studio. But
To be fair, that's how most indie studios start.
But like, I mean, like, how do you go from there? How do you stick with it and not like make it ever and then use it after a few weeks or something?
That's actually something that's close to my heart, because as a freelancer, that's something I have to constantly be aware of, because I'm by myself usually in an office with me and my dog, and I have to get stuff done. So there's a lot of different techniques, but really a lot will boil down to taking small chunks. If you sit there and say, I have to write design the whole game, that's huge and scary. But if you say, I'm going to work on what the protagonist looks like today. Now I'm going to do what the protagonist does, what their actions are. Now I'm going to do what the core game design is. I mean, not necessarily that's not the right order. The point is that taking small chunks and go, I'm going to spend an hour doing X, and then accomplishing X. Then you have these small little things that you go. Then next thing you know, you have 30 of those done, and you're halfway through a game design done. So I mean, that's a huge help to me.
Yes, and the other thing to do is don't try to invent, if you're starting as a writer, don't try to invent a game engine yourself. Like, get together with RPG Maker, Twine, all these things are hugely valuable resources.
Oh.
What is that one called?
Tyranno Builder.
Is that okay?
It does interact out.
Yeah, so, I mean, this would actually be good to go through some of those, because one thing you don't want to do as a writer who's just getting started is be, okay, first thing I need to do is learn DirectX. You know, the first thing I need to do is learn C. That is not the first thing you need to do.
There's a lot of middle.
How would someone who doesn't have any connections break into the industry at all? Like, I have a tech friend, but me and him don't really get along. It's like, how do I even begin to break into the gaming industry?
IGDA, GGDA, these are two. Locally, there's the Georgia Game.
There's two local organizations. There's the GGDA, Georgia Game Developer Association, and the IGDA Atlanta chapter is the International Game Developer Association. They're always very accommodating to new people. They want to hear about you. If you're outreach, like writing, write fanfic for your favorite game. Bring it out like that so people get, recognize that name and then build off of that.
Find a mod team.
Yep.
Yeah, you got all the mod teams.
Sweat equity, work for free, just find somebody who's looking for a writer or an editor or a proofreader or anything. That's how I got into the industry, was just writing for free. One day it was 2002. I was playing this crappy little game nobody ever heard of called Game Online. No, back then nobody had it. So the game is sprawling and confusing, so I get on their website, you know, the internet back then, and it was all just written in like rough Icelandic, like nails on chalkboard English. And I just shot an email to them, and I just said, hey, I love your game, but your website sounds like it was written by a blind, disabled monkey. Like, it's horrible. It's horrible. I want to like your game.
Developers love getting those emails.
They do. They do on most right away.
Most don't, but I got an email back that same day saying, with an attached document, here's all the text for the website. Go ahead.
We do not endorse this career path. I'd like to also, there's a subreddit called Indie Game Dev, I want to say. But it's basically lots of like, you know, hey, I'm a writer looking for work on X kind of projects, or like projects, hey, we need a writer for a short kind of thing. There's Indie Dev hashtag on Twitter that also has, hey, I'm looking for X, or I'm offering X. Craigslist really has some opportunities on it. Gama Sutra is a great website for paying jobs, apply for jobs. Gama Sutra has a ton of industry jobs, full-time and part-time, and some even contract work. But really it comes down to is having a sample, having to be able to say, I made this blind game, and I made this mod to show people would be a huge benefit.
Also learn another discipline, like multi-class. Seriously, that will really help you.
I mean, we talked about my Python skills, but that actually really helped you pick up some games.
Seriously, multidisciplinarianism is what saved me from the first project when I was at CCP back in 2011. They fired that team of writers I was talking about that I was on. Those guys all left, but I was also a level designer, so I was put on Dust 514. So it can really help.
Updated job titles.
Plus, it helps you work with other people when you understand I mean, like, who's the best League of Legends players in the world are the ones who know all the characters, right? So they know how to play their favorite, but they know how to fight and deal with all the others. You learn that, pick up a little scripting language, learn a little level of design. If you are artistically inclined, which I'm not, definitely pick that up, draw on some characters. If you can, a lot of times I'll be trying to explain to a programmer how some special jump power should work, or to an artist about how some dragon should look. If you can do something better than a stick figure, that'll save you both a lot of time and effort.
So I know, I just want to, because it's so important what Eddie said there about writing samples and writing examples of your work and getting, just download Twine and make an adventure that makes people be like, wow, because from the hiring point of view, you are in competition with attention with a lot of people who think they are writers. And so from the point of view of the hirer, they are getting emails every day with, I am a writer. And that just doesn't, it just washes right over you. If you say, I am a writer and here is my Twine game, and I click on it and I'm like, oh, holy crap, this is fantastic. It's such a leg up.
Yep. And Twine is really, I mean, it's we keep mentioning it, part of the reason why is because it's very simple to use. I mean, if you know how to use Wiki, you know how to use Twine. And it's also, a lot of people have been trying some stuff with it, so it's got a lot of cachet inside and outside the industry. So it's a very simple tool. You can do it in the browser, and a lot of people are looking at it, so it's a really good kind of default. Yeah.
Even if you're not shipping a game on it, a lot of companies will use it to prototype games.
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Do the whole dialogue tree for this whole encounter, all these NPCs. I can do all that in Twine in an afternoon and figure out if it's going anywhere before I hand it off to somebody else to actually start.
And not writers like this. It's a flowchart. It's like, I understand this.
Yes.
It used to be the case that you could really go to the tabletop role-playing game industry and then get into that, because there was a lot of people going into the interactive industry. It's not so much the case anymore, but if you're into tabletop RPGs, it's much easier to break in and get published credits, and that always helps to have, even if it's something that a recruiter's not going to read, having a published credit, and eventually it might actually be a game that one of the designers has actually played and liked your stuff, so that's another big way to get exposure.
Never mind, great episode. They're brand new. Someone in the back headphones, your hand in hand for a while. Your hand is up.
So thus far, you guys have been talking about, writing to fill in the blanks, basically their games. And I just want to know how you feel about particular games where the actual game development is like first you're doing the writing and then you structure the game based on the actual writing. I want to know how you guys feel about that. Like, you know, for example, I don't know if you guys do this, but Donkey Kong was actually like the first game we designed that.
Yeah.
Had like a cute little story in the basic game, but yeah, like how it was actually based on a pop one, for example. But how do you guys feel about, you know, gameplay based on writing rather than writing just a villain?
I love it. I wish we could have it more often. That would be fantastic.
Very cool.
If you know of anybody who
I mean, I am working on a project now that way, only because it's an interactive novel, so I mean, the writing's pretty much the entirety of the gameplay as well, so I have the advantage of like, if there's not no writing, there's nothing there except for choose A or B and you're out of the way. Being able to kind of be at the pitch with the developer, the producer, and say, here's what I want to do, here's where I want to go with it. It was interesting to me because I'm used to the pro side of it, where it's like, hey, I want to tell this story, and they say yes, and then you go do it, and then finish. And that's when you start iterating the final product. There's the pitch, which is the brief, I want to do the story, and then there's some form of final story. With video games, it's much more iterative. So what we have is like, I do a pitch, and I do an outline. It's a longer, like 4 or 5 pages, and part of that was what the key decision was. What are the decisions the player's making? And what does that say about the story? And then from there, it was, okay, let's do the first chapter of that, first like 5,000 words code. And then we played that briefly, and then we had some sessions on that, and then did another 10,000 words and 20,000 words. And each time, there were times where we decided, okay, the gameplay and the story are differing slightly, and I had to go back and rewrite some of the earlier chunks because of the iterative process. So that's, I think, in an ideal world, we'd all love to work. But the reality is that a lot of times games are greenlit for other reasons, like we have this franchise, we do something with it. Or we have this great idea involving guys, we want to do a shooter, in sci-fi shooter in space. And already a huge chunks of your backstory, by implication, are already decided before you can bring a writer in. And that's much more traditional, where it's like, they said, we want to target this exact audience. And that same audience wants this checklist of things, and now you have to take the checklist of things and turn it into a story. That's pretty much more common of experience in my opinion.
But that can work out really well too. There will be a lot of times where you'll come up with a story and it goes into production, and you think you're the writer and you've got all the good ideas, and these other people are just going to make the game. But they'll come back to you with questions or comments that suddenly open your eyes, where you're like, well, that's a much better idea than what I came up with. And you don't tell anybody, but we're gonna change the story to go that way. I was writing the tutorial for Global Agenda, and when we
I wish there was more tutorial to Global Agenda.
what's that?
I wish the Global Agenda had more tutorial.
It did, funny enough. But anyway, so we were writing the tutorial, and it came time to make the characters, and the lead character artist, Sean, he showed me the character, just like the sort of armorless jumpsuit that you wake up in, and there were no shoes on it, just had bare feet, and I was like, that's amazing, that's a fantastic idea. Like, of course when you just come right out of the cloning tube, you're not gonna have your combat boots on, you're just gonna have bare feet because you were plugged into the machine. And we wrote that and went with that in the story, gave it kind of a Die Hard feel, you're running around this sci-fi base with a machine gun, and everybody's shooting at you, you've got your little toes wiggling there, makes you feel a little more vulnerable, right? So, I mean, there's all kinds of times like that where somebody will put a twist on a character, you'll see something in the environment that was never part of the story, but just sort of showed up from some level designer, some character artist, some concept artist, put it in there, and you're like, I'm going to steal that idea, and that's going to be the centerpiece of chapter 2, which I haven't even written yet. Collaboration can be really
Absolutely. Let's talk about one more question, maybe 2. So right there.
So since everyone in this panel seems to have worked with CCP at some point, I played E for about 6 years. So how do you write for a universe that's basically, you have capsuleers, you have NPCs. How do you write for a universe where the capsuleers are controlling so much of the universe that the NPCs are almost just a second entity in it that are just doing their own thing? If you've seen more recently, they have the drifters, the kind of Jovians finding their way back into the general populace. Like, how do you write to kind of make a narrative around, oh, well, this is kind of happening, and then you kind of use the base of capsuleers to be like, oh, this is going to happen, and you let rumors build up, and all this, filed on Reddit build up. Like, how do you try to predict what people are doing and it's kind of impossible?
well, for EVE Online specifically, we kind of had a mandate on the writing team of don't do that. Don't try to predict what's going to happen. Don't try to route the story. And in many ways, you kind of flip the dynamic. You play a game like Dragon Age or something like that, and it's very much a story about here's all of these nations, these planets, and these races, and their backstories and what they're doing. And you're an important person. You're just a person. You're on the battlefield. You're making some key decisions that might change things, but you're never going to make a decision that kills all the Turians or something like that. Like, you're never going to make that decision, so you have to sort of exist like that. When you write for you online, you have to switch that around. You'll notice that a lot of the fictions talks about the capsuleers, like the demigods, which essentially they are. This is a player, you're immortal, you're nearly omnipotent. So you just have to switch around. When you write the fiction, you're not writing about, if you're writing a fantasy game, oh, here's what the king says, and oh, the prince betrayed him, and then the players down here fighting, killing rats in the sewers to level up. You don't care about it. You switch it around so that the players are, they're changing the battle lines, they're changing, who's in charge of what, and the alliance is rising and falling. And when you write the fiction, the point of view is you're one of the plebes, right? You're one of the little peasants walking around like, oh, the capsuleers are here. What are they doing? It's beyond my comprehension. Like, they're going around doing confusing things, and that makes it easy for a player to insert themselves into that fiction and say, oh yeah, if I were to write a new chronicle about the battle, I would try to describe what happened in the battle. Right. I would describe it from the point of view of like the 10-year-old boy on the planet who's just looking up and seeing the flashing lights in space and wondering what's happening. And some player would read that and be like, oh, I remember that. I was at that battle. Oh, that bright flash of lights from when the Titan blew up. That was me, Lost so much money, kind of good game.
Do you guys have anything else that you want to cover?
I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're just about out. So thank you guys very much for coming. We really appreciate it.